The warning sirens screamed across Colony Sigma 7 at 4 in the morning. Corporal Kim Tae-sung rolled out of his bunk before his mind fully understood what was happening. His hands moved on instinct, grabbing his uniform and boots. Around him, other soldiers did the same. Nobody spoke. They all knew what the sirens meant. The Krell had found them. Tae-sung ran through the corridors of the military base, his heart pounding in his chest. The lights flickered red, then white, then red again. He could hear explosions in the distance, getting closer with each passing second. The colony's defensive shields were taking hits. "Big ones, communications center now," someone shouted. That was his post. Tae-sung pushed through the crowd of soldiers heading to their stations. He passed Lee Minna in the hallway. She was carrying medical supplies, her face pale but determined. They had grown up together on Earth before joining the military. She grabbed his arm as he ran past. "Stay alive, Tae-sung," she said. "You too," he replied, and then she was gone, running toward the medical bay. The communication center was chaos. Screens showed Krell warships dropping out of hyperspace by the dozens. Their ships were massive, shaped like curved blades, black metal that seemed to absorb light. The colony's defense fleet looked like toys next to them. Captain Park Ji-woo stood at the center of the room, barking orders into 3 different channels at once. "Get me a count," Park demanded. "How many ships?" 47 capital ships, someone answered. "Hundreds of fighters. Sir, this is their entire armada." Tae-sung sat at his console and pulled up the defense grid. His fingers flew across the keyboard, trying to coordinate communications between the scattered defense positions. The colony had 12,000 soldiers. The Krell had brought enough ships to carry 10 times that number. They were going to lose. Park Ji-woo seemed to read his mind. The captain moved to stand behind Tae-sung's chair, his hand heavy on the young corporal's shoulder. "I know what you're thinking," Park said quietly. "But we don't have the luxury of despair right now. Do your job." Tae-sung nodded and focused on his screens. He routed emergency channels, sent evacuation orders to civilian sectors, and tried to keep track of which defensive positions were still responding. Every few minutes, another position went dark. The Krell were cutting through their defenses like they were made of paper. The battle lasted 2 days, but it felt like 2 years. Tae-sung watched it all from the communications center. He saw the defense fleet torn apart in the first 6 hours. He listened to the desperate calls from soldiers on the front lines as Krell ground forces landed. He heard the screams when the eastern wall fell. He sent messages he knew would never be answered. Captain Park Ji-woo barely slept. He stayed at his post, coordinating the defense, pulling soldiers back from lost positions, trying to save as many lives as possible. But there was only so much he could do. The Krell had better weapons, better armor, and more soldiers. They had planned this attack for months, maybe years. Humanity had been caught completely by surprise. On the second day, Park pulled Tae-sung aside. The captain's face was covered in dust and dried blood from a wound on his forehead. His eyes were hollow with exhaustion. "I need you to do something for me," Park said. "Something important?" "Anything, sir." Park handed him a data chip. "This contains everything we know about the Krell. Their tactics, their weapons, their language. Everything we've learned from fighting them. I need you to take it and hide." Tae-sung stared at him. "Sir?" "The bunker system beneath the colony. Level 9, Section 14. There's an old storage room there. It has independent power and life support. I need you to go there and seal yourself in." "I won't abandon my post," Tae-sung said. Park grabbed him by the shoulders. "This isn't about abandoning anything. If we all die here, everything we learned dies with us. Someone needs to survive. Someone needs to make sure Earth knows what happened here." His grip tightened. "I'm ordering you, Corporal. Go, now." Tae-sung wanted to argue, but he could see there was no point. Park Ji-woo had made up his mind. "What about you, sir?" "I'm going to buy you as much time as I can." Park managed a tired smile. "Besides, captains go down with their ships. It's tradition." They shook hands. Tae-sung wanted to say something meaningful, something that would matter, but his throat was too tight. Instead, he just nodded and turned to go. "Tae-sung," Park called after him. "Tell Earth we fought well." "I will, sir." The bunker system was a maze of tunnels and rooms built deep underground. It was designed to protect civilians during bombardment, but most of the civilians were already dead or captured. Tae-sung ran through empty corridors, the data chip clutched in his hand. Behind him, he could hear the battle raging. The Krell were inside the main complex now. He found the room Park had described. It was small, maybe 3 meters by 3 meters, filled with old equipment and supply crates. Tae-sung sealed the door and activated the independent systems. The room's lights came on, humming softly. He sat down on a crate and finally let himself breathe. Then the world above him exploded. The bunker shook so hard that Tae-sung was thrown to the floor. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. The lights went out, then came back on, flickering weakly. He could hear massive impacts, one after another, like thunder that never stopped. The Krell were bombarding the colony from orbit. Tae-sung curled up in the corner and covered his head. There was nothing else he could do. He thought about Park Ji-woo, about Lee Min-ah, about all the soldiers fighting up above. He thought about his family back on Earth. He wondered if they would ever know what happened here. The bombardment lasted for hours. When it finally stopped, the silence was worse than the noise. Tae-sung waited 3 days before he tried to leave the room. He survived on emergency rations and water from the room's supply cache. He slept in short bursts, always waking to the sound of explosions that weren't there. On the 3rd day, he gathered his courage and unsealed the door. The bunker system was in ruins. Half the tunnels had collapsed. It took Tae-sung 6 hours to dig his way to the surface. When he finally emerged, he wished he hadn't. Colony Sigma-7 was gone. The buildings were rubble. The streets were craters. Bodies lay everywhere, human and Krell both. The sky was dark with smoke. In the distance, he could see Krell ships landing and taking off, carrying away everything of value. Tae-sung found the communications center, or what was left of it. The building had been hit directly. There were no survivors. He found Captain Park Ji-woo's body in the ruins, still at his post. Tae-sung knelt beside his mentor and gently closed the captain's eyes. "I'll tell them, sir," he whispered. "I'll tell them you fought well." He found Lee Min-ah in the medical bay. She had died defending her patients. Her hand still clutched a rifle. Tae-sung sat beside her for a long time, not speaking, just remembering the girl who had once climbed trees with him in the parks of Earth. That evening, as the sun set over the ruins, Tae-sung heard a broadcast. It was coming from every Krell speaker in the colony, transmitted across the entire galaxy. A voice spoke in perfect human language, full of arrogance and triumph. "I am General Vexthor, Supreme Commander of the Krell Armada. The human military is destroyed. Your colonies are ours. Earth will fall within the month. Humanity is defeated. This war is over." Tae-sung stood in the ruins and listened to the broadcast. His hands clenched into fists. His jaw tightened. General Vexthor was wrong about one thing. The war wasn't over. Not yet. Corporal Kim Tae-sung spent the first week learning how to be invisible. The Krell controlled everything now. Their patrols walked through the ruins at all hours. Their ships flew overhead constantly. They had set up checkpoints and command posts throughout what remained of Colony Sigma-7. They thought they owned this place, Tae-sung, lived in the bunker during the day and moved through the ruins at night. He wore a torn Krell cloak he had taken from a dead soldier. In the darkness from a distance, he could pass for one of them. It wasn't a perfect disguise, but it was enough to buy him a few extra seconds when he needed them. He had learned a lot about the Krell in that first week. They were taller than humans, with gray skin and 4 arms. They were strong and fast, but they relied too much on their technology. They expected their sensors and cameras to warn them of danger. They didn't post guards the way humans did. They didn't watch their backs. That was going to be their mistake. Tae-sung started small. He sabotaged a Krell supply truck by cutting the power lines to its engine. He loosened bolts on a communications tower until it fell during a windstorm. He contaminated a water supply with chemicals from the colony's destroyed industrial sector. Nothing big. Nothing that would make them think a human was still alive and fighting. But it was a start. At night in the bunker, Tae-sung studied the data chip Captain Park had given him. It contained detailed information about Krell weapons, tactics, and language. Park and the other officers had been gathering intelligence on the Krell for years, trying to understand their enemy. Now all that knowledge belonged to one exhausted corporal hiding in the dark. Tae-sung learned to speak basic Krell. The language was harsh and clicking, hard on human vocal cords, but he practiced until he could manage simple phrases. He learned how their military ranks worked, how their units were organized, and how they communicated with each other. He learned about their honor system, their rigid chain of command, and their complete confidence in their own superiority. That confidence was going to be their second mistake. One night, 2 weeks after the colony fell, Taesung found a Krell patrol on the western edge of the ruins. 4 soldiers walking in a standard formation, their weapons held casually. They were talking and laughing. They thought they were safe. Taesung had spent 3 days preparing for this moment. He had dug a pit and covered it with scrap metal and debris. He had rigged explosives using materials from the colony's destroyed armory. He had planned his escape route through a network of collapsed buildings. He had done everything his drill instructor, Sergeant Choi Byung-ho, had taught him about unconventional warfare. Old Choi had been a legend in the military. He had fought in the border wars 20 years ago, back when humanity was still fighting itself. He had taught Taesung and his unit everything about guerrilla tactics, about fighting when you were outnumbered and outgunned. War isn't about being strong, Choi used to say. It's about being smart. It's about making the enemy afraid of shadows. Taesung waited in the darkness until the patrol reached the trapped area. Then he triggered the explosives remotely. The blast lit up the night. The lead Krell soldier fell into the pit. The others scattered, searching for the threat. Taesung fired 3 shots from his concealed position. 2 Krell went down. The 4th one started to call for backup. Taesung shot him before he could finish. 4 Krell dead in under 30 seconds. Taesung didn't wait to see the results. He ran through his escape route, moving fast and low, getting as far from the site as possible. Behind him, he could hear Krell reinforcements arriving, shouting in their harsh language. By the time they secured the area, he was already back in the bunker, breathing hard, his hands shaking from adrenaline. He had done it. He had struck back. Over the next month, Taesung hit the Krell again and again. He destroyed a fuel depot using homemade incendiary devices. He hacked into their communication network and corrupted their supply manifests, sending shipments to the wrong locations. He set up sniper positions and picked off isolated soldiers, always taking his shot and disappearing before they could respond. The Krell started to get nervous. Taesung could hear it in their communications, which he monitored constantly. They were reporting equipment failures, accidents, unexplained casualties. They blamed the harsh environment of the ruined colony. They blamed faulty maintenance. They blamed each other. They never blamed a human. General Vexthor had declared humanity defeated. His soldiers believed him. The idea that a single human could still be fighting never crossed their minds. That was their 3rd mistake. Taesung left messages at the sites of his attacks. He carved them into metal, scratched them into walls, spray-painted them on Krell equipment. Always the same 3 words in Krell language. Humanity endures here. He wanted them to know. He wanted them to understand that they hadn't won. Not completely. Not while he still breathed. 2 months after the colony fell, Taesung made his biggest strike yet. He had been watching a Krell supply convoy for weeks, learning its route and schedule. The convoy carried ammunition and weapons from the starport to the Krell command center every 3 days. It was heavily guarded, but there was one point on the route where it had to slow down to navigate through a narrow pass between collapsed buildings. Taesung spent 5 days setting up the ambush. He placed explosives along both sides of the pass. He rigged buildings to collapse on command. He prepared 3 escape routes and 2 backup positions. He studied the convoy's timing down to the second. When the convoy entered the pass, Taesung waited until the lead vehicles were in the kill zone. Then he triggered everything at once. The explosions were massive. Buildings came down on top of the convoy, crushing vehicles and soldiers. Ammunition cooked off in secondary explosions that lit up the sky. The convoy's guards fired wildly in all directions, not knowing where the attack was coming from. Taesung fired from his first position, dropped 6 soldiers, then moved to his backup position and fired again. The entire ambush lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, 15 Krell soldiers were dead and the convoy was completely destroyed. Hundreds of tons of ammunition gone. Dozens of weapons lost. Taesung escaped through a drainage tunnel he had cleared weeks earlier. He could hear the Krell shouting behind him, could hear their ships taking off to search for the attacker. He ran through the darkness until his lungs burned and his legs felt like they would collapse. When he finally reached the bunker, he sealed himself inside and let himself fall to the floor. He had hurt them. Really hurt them. That night, Taesung intercepted an encrypted Krell transmission. It was a report to General Vexthor's flagship, still in orbit above the planet. The report detailed the losses from the convoy attack. It mentioned the mysterious equipment failures and casualties over the past 2 months. It suggested that perhaps there was an organized resistance operating in the ruins. The response from Vexthor's flagship came quickly. The general's voice was cold and dismissive. There is no resistance. The humans are dead. Your losses are the result of poor discipline and insufficient attention to duty. Secure the area properly or I will find a commander who can. Tae-sung smiled in the darkness of the bunker. Good. Let them think it was incompetence. Let them ignore the signs. It would make his job easier. But then he intercepted another transmission, one that made his blood run cold. The Krell were preparing to launch their attack on Earth. They were using Colony Sigma-7 as a staging ground, gathering supplies and troops for the final assault on humanity's homeworld. The attack would begin in 3 months. 3 months. Tae-sung sat in the darkness and thought about Earth. His family was there. His little sister. His parents. Billions of people who had no idea what was coming for them. He looked at the data chip Captain Park had given him. All this intelligence needed to reach Earth. Someone needed to warn them. But there were no working communications arrays left on the planet. The Krell had destroyed them all. There were no human ships left either. Everything was gone. Everything except one stubborn corporal who refused to die. Tae-sung stood up. He had been fighting to survive, fighting to honor the memory of his friends, fighting because he didn't know what else to do. But now he had a purpose. He had to stop the Krell from using this colony as their staging ground. He had to slow them down, disrupt their plans, buy Earth more time. One man couldn't stop an army. Sergeant Choi had told him that 1,000 times. But one man could make an army bleed. One man could make them afraid. One man could make them waste time and resources hunting shadows. General Vexthor had declared victory too early. Now he was going to learn what that mistake cost. The ammunition depot explosion could be seen from orbit. Tae-sung watched from a safe distance as the night sky turned orange, then white, then orange again. Secondary explosions rippled through the Krell facility for 10 minutes straight. He had used every explosive he could make or steal, placed them perfectly throughout the depot, and timed the detonation for maximum effect. 300 Krell soldiers had been stationed at that depot. None of them walked away. Tae-sung disappeared into the ruins before the reinforcements arrived. He moved through paths he had memorized over months of careful scouting. The Krell were angry now. He could hear their ships screaming overhead, hunting for him with thermal sensors and motion detectors. But he knew how to hide from their technology. He used the colony's damaged power grid to create false signatures. He moved through areas with high background radiation that confused their sensors. He stayed 3 steps ahead of them. He had become the ghost of Sigma-7, though he didn't know the Krell had started calling him that. The next morning, exhausted and covered in dust, Tae-sung nearly shot Han Soo-jin in the face. He had been searching a collapsed industrial building for supplies when he heard movement. He spun around, rifle raised, finger on the trigger. A woman stood there, hands up, eyes wide with fear. She was human, thin, dirty, wearing torn civilian clothes. She looked like she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. "Don't shoot," she said quietly. "Please, I'm human. My name is Han Soo-jin." Tae-sung lowered his rifle slowly. "How are you alive?" "I've been hiding since the invasion. I worked in the industrial sector before, in maintenance. I know every tunnel and crawl space in this part of the colony." She looked at him carefully. "You're the one who's been attacking them, aren't you? The Krell have been going crazy trying to find you." "Just doing my job," Tae-sung said. Soo-jin smiled for the first time. It changed her whole face. "Good, I want to help." They talked for hours in that ruined building. Soo-jin was an engineer, specialized in power systems and electronics. She had been trapped in a maintenance tunnel when the Krell attacked and had been living in the industrial sector's underground network ever since. She had tools, technical knowledge, and access to equipment that Tae-sung desperately needed. "I can build things," she told him. "Bombs, jamming devices, anything electronic. I just didn't know how to use them. I'm not a soldier." "I'll teach you," Tae-sung said. "And you'll teach me about systems and electronics." "Deal, deal." 3 days later they found Kang Jae-min. Or rather, he found them. Tae-sung and Soo-jin were setting up a trap near the starport when someone spoke behind them in Korean. "You two are the loudest ghosts I've ever seen." Tae-sung spun around with his weapon ready. A man stood in the shadows, also armed, also human. He was older than Tae-sung, maybe 40, with short gray hair and a pilot's jacket. "Relax," the man said. I'm on your side. Name's Kang Jamin. I crashed my fighter during the initial attack. Been surviving in the starport area ever since, he grinned. I've been watching you work. Pretty impressive for a corporal. You're a pilot? Sujin asked. Best damned pilot in the defense fleet, Jamin said without modesty. Or I was before the fleet got wiped out. I've been trying to repair a Krell shuttle I found in the starport. Get it flying and maybe we could actually do some real damage. The three of them formed a team. Sujin built the devices. Tae-sung planned the operations. Jamin provided mobility and reconnaissance. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. Over the next month, they escalated their attacks. Sujin built a signal jammer that disrupted Krell communications for hours. They used the chaos to hit 3 different supply convoys simultaneously. Jamin scouted from high vantage points, giving them real-time information about Krell movements. They started to move like a real military unit instead of desperate survivors. But their most effective weapon was something Sujin called the Ghost Protocol. She had figured out how to hack into Krell communication networks. It wasn't easy. Their encryption was sophisticated, but Sujin was patient and brilliant, and she had access to the intelligence data that Captain Park had given Tae-sung. After 2 weeks of work, she cracked their system. I can send messages, she told them, her eyes bright with excitement. I can impersonate their commanders. I can give false orders. They tested it carefully at first. Small things. Orders to patrol areas in the wrong direction. Instructions to report to locations for briefings that didn't exist. The Krell followed the orders without question. Their rigid command structure worked against them. If an order came from a superior, they obeyed it. Then Tae-sung had a better idea. What if we made them fight each other? He asked. They planned it carefully. There were 2 Krell battalions stationed in the northern sector, about a kilometer apart. Sujin sent orders to Battalion 1, claiming to be from Battalion 2's commander, saying that Battalion 1 had been infiltrated by human spies and needed to be detained immediately. At the same time, she sent orders to Battalion 2, saying that Battalion 1 had gone rogue and needed to be suppressed. Both battalions received their orders. Both believed them. Both moved to engage. The firefight lasted 20 minutes. By the time the Krell command realized what had happened and stopped the fighting, 63 Krell soldiers were dead and dozens more were wounded. All because of a few fake messages. Tae-sung listened to the confused communications afterward. The Krell commanders were furious and baffled. They couldn't understand how their secure channels had been compromised. They started to suspect each other of incompetence or sabotage. We're not just fighting them anymore, Jamin said, listening to the chaos on the Krell frequencies. We're making them paranoid. We're making them weak. But their success brought new problems. The Krell were losing too much equipment and too many soldiers. Casualties were mounting. Supply lines were disrupted. General Vexthor's plan to use Sigma-7 as a staging ground for the Earth invasion was falling behind schedule. Someone was going to pay attention soon. Commander Zulkan was the first to notice. He was General Vexthor's senior lieutenant, in charge of ground operations on the colony. Zulkan was different from most Krell officers. He was careful and analytical. He didn't dismiss problems as incompetence. He looked for patterns. Tae-sung intercepted a report that Zulkan sent to the general's flagship. The commander detailed every attack, every equipment failure, every casualty over the past 4 months. He noted the precision of the strikes. He highlighted the sophisticated use of Krell tactics and knowledge. He concluded that there was organized resistance operating in the ruins, led by someone with military training. General Vexthor's response was brief and dismissive. Commander Zulkan, your concern is noted but unfounded. The human military was destroyed. What you describe is impossible. I suggest you focus on securing the colony properly, rather than inventing phantom enemies. Do not waste my time with such reports again. Tae-sung felt a cold satisfaction reading that response. Vexthor's arrogance was a weapon they could use. As long as the general refused to believe humans were still fighting, he wouldn't send the reinforcements or resources needed to stop them. But Zulkan didn't give up. He started implementing new security measures. Random patrols instead of scheduled ones. Encrypted communications with daily rotating codes. Surveillance drones in areas where attacks had occurred. He was making it harder for the 3 humans to operate. We need to think bigger, Tae-sung said one night in their hideout, a hidden room in the industrial sector that Sujin had converted into a workshop. We've been hurting them, but we haven't stopped them. They're still preparing for the Earth invasion. What do you have in mind? Sujin asked. Taesung pointed to a map of the starport. There's a Krell supply convoy scheduled to depart in 3 days. It's carrying weapons and ammunition to Vex Thor's flagship. If we could hijack it, we could use those supplies. Maybe even get intelligence about their invasion plans. That's a suicide mission, Jaemin said. But he was smiling. I love it. They spent 2 days preparing. Sujin created fake credentials that would pass Krell security scans. Jaemin mapped the convoy route and identified the best interception point. Taesung drilled them on Krell military protocols until they could act like Krell soldiers. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would pose as Krell supply officers, board the convoy using Sujin's fake credentials, take control of the lead vehicle, and fly it out of the starport before anyone realized what had happened. If everything went perfectly, they would succeed. If anything went wrong, they would die. The operation went perfectly for exactly 4 minutes. They boarded the shuttle without problems. Sujin's credentials worked. They reached the cockpit and Jaemin started the launch sequence. The shuttle lifted off smoothly, rising above the starport. Then the alarms started. They know, Jaemin said, his hands flying over the controls. Someone figured it out. We've got 3 fighters inbound. The shuttle wasn't armed. It wasn't designed for combat. But Jaemin was the best pilot in the defense fleet, and he proved it. He dove toward the ruins, flying so low that the Krell fighters couldn't get a clean shot without hitting buildings. He weaved through collapsed structures, through smoke and debris clouds, pushing the shuttle to its limits. The resistance grew slowly. Taesung, Sujin, and Jaemin found others, a family of 4 hiding in a food storage facility, 2 soldiers who had been trapped in a collapsed barracks, a mechanic, a teacher, a teenage boy who had watched his parents die. By the end of the 5th month after the invasion, they numbered 15 people, 15 humans against an army. It should have been hopeless, but they had something the Krell didn't have. They had nothing left to lose. Yoon Da-yoon was the teacher. She was 40 years old, quiet and thoughtful, with gray streaks in her black hair. Before the invasion, she had taught history at the colony's school. She had never held a weapon in her life. Now she carried a rifle and helped plan ambushes with the calm precision she once used to plan lessons. I taught my students about resistance movements throughout human history, she told Taesung one night. I never thought I would become part of one. But I understand now why people fight even when they can't win, because surrender isn't really living. The 15 survivors had divided into 3 teams. Taesung led Team Alpha, focusing on direct attacks. Sujin led Team Beta, handling sabotage and electronic warfare. Jaemin led Team Gamma, providing mobility and reconnaissance. They coordinated their attacks carefully, hitting multiple targets at once, keeping the Krell off balance. They were no longer ghosts. They were a real fighting force. But their biggest success came from above, not below. Sujin had been working on a plan for weeks. The Krell had a command ship in orbit, a massive vessel that coordinated all ground operations. It was heavily defended, impossible to reach with anything they had. But it relied on a network of communication satellites to maintain contact with the ground forces. If we could take out even one satellite, Sujin explained, it would disrupt their entire orbital communication network. They would be blind for hours while they rerouted through backup systems. How do we reach a satellite? Jaemin asked. We don't have any ships that can make orbit, Sujin smiled. No, but they do. There's a missile battery on the eastern ridge. They use it for planetary defense. If we could capture it and reprogram the missiles, we could shoot down their satellite. It took them 3 weeks to plan the operation. The missile battery was heavily guarded and far from their usual operating area. They would need everyone for this attack. All 15 people working together in perfect coordination. They struck at dawn. Team Alpha hit the main gate with explosives and small arms fire, drawing the guards' attention. Team Gamma came from the north, cutting through the perimeter fence. Team Beta infiltrated through a drainage system that Sujin had scouted weeks earlier. The battle was intense and chaotic. The Krell defenders fought hard, but they were disorganized and confused. They still didn't fully believe they were fighting humans. They kept expecting their reinforcements to arrive and crush the attackers easily. The reinforcements never came. Sujin had jammed their communications. Taesung fought his way to the control center with Team Alpha. They cleared the building room by room. He saw one of his people, a young man named Bae Hoseok, take a shot to the chest. He saw Yoon Da-un kill a Krell soldier with calm precision, her hand steady on her rifle. They reached the missile control room. Soo-jin was already there with her team, working on the computers. "Give me 5 minutes," she said, not looking up from her screen. "You've got 3, Tae-sung replied. Hearing more Krell forces approaching in the distance, Soo-jin worked faster than he had ever seen anyone work. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, breaking through security protocols, rerouting system controls, programming new targeting data into the missiles. Jamin and his team held the door, firing at Krell soldiers trying to break through. "Done," Soo-jin said. She pressed a final key. "Firing now." The building shook as 6 missiles launched from their tubes. They screamed into the sky, climbing higher and higher until they were just bright spots against the dawn clouds. The Krell soldiers outside stopped fighting, watching in confusion. Then high above in orbit, there was a flash of light. The command ship's communication satellite was gone. "Move," Tae-sung ordered. "Everyone out now!" They evacuated through their planned escape routes. The Krell were in chaos, trying to understand what had just happened. By the time they organized a proper pursuit, the 15 humans had scattered into the ruins. They met at their rendezvous point 6 hours later. They had lost 3 people in the attack. Bae Hoshok had died from his wounds. 2 others hadn't made it back. But they had done something incredible. They had hurt the Krell where they thought they were untouchable. That evening, Tae-sung intercepted an emergency transmission to General Vexthor's flagship. Commander Zulkan's voice was steady but urgent. "General, the satellite is destroyed. We've lost 1/3 of our orbital communication network. More importantly, the attack was coordinated and professional. The attackers knew our security protocols. They used our own weapons against us. Sir, I can no longer deny the evidence. There are surviving human military personnel on this planet, and they are conducting a systematic campaign against our forces." There was a long silence. Then Vexthor's voice came through, cold and hard. "How many humans?" "Unknown, sir. Based on the attack patterns, possibly a platoon. 20 to 30 soldiers. I crushed 12,000 soldiers in this colony," Vexthor said. "You're telling me that 20 survivors are destroying my operation?" "Sir, these aren't random survivors. They're trained, organized, and they have someone leading them who understands warfare. I request permission to bring in additional forces and conduct a full planetary sweep." Another long silence. Then Vexthor spoke, and Tae-sung could hear the anger in his voice. "Permission granted. I will come to the surface myself. I want to see these humans who dare to resist, and when we find them, I will execute them personally." The transmission ended. Tae-sung sat in the darkness, the weight of those words settling over him. Vexthor was coming. The general who had crushed humanity's military, who commanded thousands of ships and millions of soldiers, was coming to hunt 15 desperate survivors personally. "We got his attention," Soo-jin said quietly. She had been listening to the transmission as well. "Yes," Tae-sung agreed. "Now we need to survive it." But surviving became harder with each passing day. Vexthor brought 5,000 additional troops to the colony. He implemented new security measures that made Zulkan's protocols look gentle. He divided the ruins into sectors and swept them systematically, building by building. He used chemical sensors to detect human DNA. He deployed hunter-killer drones that could track targets for kilometers. The 15 survivors were forced to move constantly, never staying in one location for more than a few hours. They had to abandon their main hideout when Krell forces got too close. They lost contact with one of their supply caches when it was discovered. They were running out of food, ammunition, and options. Then Yoon Da-un was captured. It happened during a supply run. She and 2 others were scavenging in the western sector when a Krell patrol appeared unexpectedly. The other 2 escaped. Da-yoon provided covering fire to make sure they got away. She was captured alive. Tae-sung heard about it through Krell communications. They were bringing her to the command center for interrogation. Vexthor himself would question her. "We have to rescue her," one of the survivors said. "We can't," Jamin replied, his voice heavy. "The command center is a fortress. We'd all die trying, so we just leave her?" another person asked. Tae-sung listened to them argue. He knew Jamin was right. A rescue attempt would be suicide. But he also knew what the Krell would do to Da-un. They would torture her for information. They would try to break her. That night, Tae-sung hacked into the Krell security system and accessed the cameras in the interrogation room. He shouldn't have watched, but he needed to know. Yunda-un sat in a metal chair, her hands bound. She was bruised and bloody, but her eyes were clear. General Vexthor stood before her, tall and imposing. His voice came through the speakers clearly. "Tell me about your leader," Vexthor demanded. "This corporal who has caused me so much trouble. Where is he hiding? How many of you are there?" Daeun looked up at him. "You already lost," she said simply. Vexthor struck her. "You are defeated. Your colony is destroyed. Your military is gone. Earth will fall within weeks. How have I lost?" Daeun smiled through bloody teeth. "Because you thought winning was about having more ships and more soldiers. You thought humans would surrender when we were outnumbered. You declared victory and expected us to accept it. But that's not how we work." She leaned forward despite her pain. "One human refused to accept your victory. Then 3. Then 15. And we hurt you. We made you waste months and thousands of soldiers hunting us. We disrupted your invasion plans. We showed everyone watching that humanity doesn't quit." "You are insects," Vexthor said coldly. "Nothing more. Then why are you here?" Daeun asked. "Why did you come to the surface personally? Why are you interrogating one middle-aged teacher instead of preparing for your great invasion?" She smiled again. "Because we scared you. Because 15 insects made you doubt yourself." Vexthor's expression didn't change, but Tae-sung saw something flicker in the general's eyes. It was just for a moment, but it was there. Uncertainty. Doubt. Corporal Kim Tae-sung walked into the central plaza of Colony Sigma 7 alone. He wore his uniform, torn and stained but still recognizable. His rifle hung from his shoulder. In his hand he carried a transmitter. Above him, Krell ships circled like predators. Around the plaza's edges, hundreds of Krell soldiers watched him with weapons ready. He walked to the center of the plaza and stopped. Then he activated the transmitter. His voice echoed from every Krell speaker in the colony, broadcast on every frequency they used. "General Vexthor," he said in perfect Krell language. "I am Corporal Kim Tae-sung of the Earth Defense Forces. I am the soldier who destroyed your depot. I am the one who killed your men. I am the ghost who has haunted your dreams for 6 months. You declared humanity defeated. You were wrong. I challenge you to face me here and now and prove your victory. Or are you afraid of one human soldier?" For a long moment, nothing happened. Tae-sung stood in the plaza, his heart pounding but his face calm. The Krell soldiers around him seemed confused, waiting for orders. Some had their weapons aimed at him. Others just watched. Then a ship descended from above. It was larger than the others, decorated with marks of rank and authority. The ship landed at the plaza's edge. A ramp extended, and General Vexthor walked out. The general was massive, even for a Krell, nearly 3 meters tall with armor that looked more ceremonial than practical. His forearms each carried a weapon. His face was cold and cruel. He looked at Tae-sung with something like amusement. "You are the insect who has troubled me?" Vexthor said. His voice was loud and harsh. "You look half dead already." "I'm still standing," Tae-sung replied. "That's more than I can say for the 1,000 soldiers I've killed." Vexthor's amusement faded. "You think you're brave walking into my stronghold? You think this is heroic? You're just making it easier for me to kill you." "Maybe," Tae-sung said. "But I wanted to see your face when I tell you that Earth isn't defeated. That humanity is still fighting. That your easy victory is a lie." He smiled. "I wanted to see your face when you realize you wasted 6 months hunting 15 people while Earth prepared for your invasion." 15? Vexthor laughed. "Commander Zulkan estimated 30. You accomplished all of this with 15 humans." 14 now, Tae-sung said quietly, thinking of Yunda-un. "You killed one of us. A teacher. Someone who never wanted to fight. You tortured her and murdered her because you were frustrated and angry. She was an enemy combatant," Vexthor said dismissively. "She was a reminder," Tae-sung said. "A reminder that humans don't surrender just because you have more ships. We fight because that's who we are. We fight when it's hopeless. We fight when we're outnumbered. We fight because the alternative is accepting defeat, and that's something humans don't do." Vexthor raised one of his weapons. "Enough philosophy. You came here to die. Let me grant your wish." "I came here to buy time," Tae-sung said, and he pressed a button on his transmitter. All around the plaza, explosives detonated, not near Tae-sung or Vexthor, but in the Krell defensive positions surrounding them. Sujin had spent 3 days planting them, sneaking through the sewers and maintenance tunnels she knew so well. The explosions weren't meant to kill. They were meant to create chaos, and in the chaos, the real attack began. The Krell Orbital Defense System, the massive network of satellites and weapons platforms that protected their fleet, suddenly turned on the fleet itself. Su-jin had spent 6 months learning their systems, finding backdoors, planting code. Now, with Vexthor on the surface and distracted, she activated it all. Orbital cannons that were supposed to protect Krell ships began firing on them. Targeting systems went haywire. Navigation computers failed. The organized Krell fleet suddenly became a disaster zone, with ships trying to avoid friendly fire while also searching for the source of the attack. On the ground, Kang Jaemin appeared in a stolen Krell gunship, weapons blazing. He strafed the plaza's edges, targeting the soldiers who were trying to kill Taesung. The other survivors joined the attack from multiple directions, firing from prepared positions, throwing everything they had at the confused Krell forces. But Taesung wasn't watching any of that. He was focused on Vexthor. The general roared in anger and opened fire. Taesung dove behind a piece of rubble, feeling energy blasts scorching the air where he had been standing. He returned fire, his shots bouncing off Vexthor's armor. The general advanced, all forearms firing, tearing up the plaza with weapons designed to kill armored vehicles. Taesung ran, using every piece of cover he could find. He wasn't trying to win this fight. He couldn't. Vexthor was stronger, better armed, and nearly invulnerable. But Taesung didn't need to win. He just needed to survive long enough. A blast caught him in the side, spinning him around. His armor absorbed most of it, but the impact cracked ribs. He stumbled, and Vexthor closed in for the kill. Then the sky tore open. Ships dropped out of hyperspace directly above the colony. Human ships, hundreds of them. Cruisers, destroyers, fighters, and in the center, a massive dreadnought bearing Earth's flag. Admiral Lim Seokwoo's fleet had arrived. The Krell fleet was already in chaos from Su-jin's sabotage. The arrival of the human fleet turned chaos into catastrophe. The humans had spent 6 months rebuilding in secret, learning from their previous defeats, developing new weapons and tactics. They hit the Krell with everything they had. In orbit, the battle was intense and brutal. But the humans had the advantage of surprise and the Krell's own orbital defenses working against them. One by one, Krell ships began to fall. On the ground, Vexthor stopped his attack on Taesung. The general stood frozen, watching his fleet die. His expression showed something Taesung had never seen on a Krell face before: fear. "You were saying something about easy victory?" Taesung said, getting to his feet despite his injuries. Vexthor turned back to him, rage replacing fear. "You think this changes anything? You think one fleet makes a difference? The Krell Empire has thousands of ships. But they're not here," Taesung said. "They're scattered across the galaxy, conquering other worlds, assuming Earth was finished. You declared victory too early, General. And now you're going to pay for that mistake," Vexthor charged. Taesung stood his ground. At the last second, he sidestepped, letting the general's momentum carry him forward. Taesung grabbed an exposed power cable from Vexthor's armor and pulled hard. Sparks flew. The general's shields flickered. They fought hand-to-hand now, human and alien, exhausted soldier and enraged general. Taesung was smaller, weaker, slower, but he was fighting for something Vexthor couldn't understand. He was fighting for every human who had died on this colony, for Captain Park Ji-woo, for Lee Min-ah, for Yoon Da-yoon, for every person who had refused to surrender. Vexthor landed a crushing blow that sent Taesung to the ground. The general raised his weapon for the killing shot. Taesung looked up at him and smiled through bloody teeth. "Humanity endures," he said. A shot rang out. Vexthor stumbled. More shots followed from multiple directions. The other survivors had fought their way to the plaza. They poured fire into the general, targeting the weak points in his armor, the spots where his shields had failed. Vexthor tried to fight back, but there were too many of them. 14 humans, battered and bleeding, but still fighting. They concentrated their fire. The general's armor began to fail. He fell to one knee, then to both knees. Taesung stood up. He walked to Vexthor and looked into the general's eyes. "You declared victory too early," Taesung said again. Then he fired once, and Vexthor fell. The battle in orbit was ending. The Krell fleet was broken, the survivors retreating. On the ground, Krell soldiers were surrendering or fleeing. The humans had won. Taesung collapsed to his knees, suddenly too tired to stand. Around him, his fellow survivors were doing the same. They had survived. Against all odds, against an empire, Against everything that should have killed them, they had survived. Landing craft began descending from Admiral Lim's fleet. Marines poured out, securing the area, treating the wounded. An officer ran to Tae-sung, saluting sharply. "Corporal Kim Tae-sung?" the officer asked. "Yes, sir," Tae-sung managed to say. "Sir, Admiral Lim wants to meet you. He said to tell you that Earth has been broadcasting your resistance for the last 2 weeks. Every attack, every act of defiance. You've become a symbol, Corporal. Colonies across the galaxy heard about the ghost of Sigma-7. They started their own resistance movements. The Krell Empire is facing uprisings on 20 different worlds." Tae-sung stared at him. "We did that?" "You did that, sir. 15 people showed the galaxy that humanity doesn't surrender. Medical teams arrived and began treating the survivors. Tae-sung let them work, too exhausted to protest. He watched as human ships continued to land, bringing more troops, supplies, and equipment. Colony Sigma-7 was human again. Su-jin sat down beside him, her face smudged with dirt and her hands shaking from adrenaline. "We actually survived," she said, sounding surprised. "Yeah," Tae-sung agreed. "We did." Jamin joined them, limping from a leg wound but grinning. "Best flying I've ever done." "Did you see that strafe run?" "I was busy getting shot at," Tae-sung replied. They sat together in the plaza where it had all ended, 3 survivors among 14, watching the colony come back to life. Around them, other survivors gathered. They didn't speak much,